chapter 2 of the good news of Yahushua, he whom Yahweh favors. So, verse 1. And on the third day, there was a wedding in Kana of Galilee, and the mother of Yahushua was there. As some of you or all of you may know, this event has to do with the first miracle that Yahushua performed. In general, in a prophetical way, we see the name Galil, which, as I always mention, Galil has to do with a circle or a circuit that completes or repeats, and therefore when it appears, it prophetically represents the manifestation of the last, what will happen in the end times, when many of the things that already happened will fulfill again, will repeat in history. Also, Kana, which, depending on how it is written in Hebrew, the translation, of course. So let me check how it appears here, since it will be the Greek first. So here we have Kana, place of reeds. Remember that the what most call the Red Sea was in fact the Sea of Reeds. In Hebrew, the Yam Suf, which also Suf, which means reeds, means, the way it is written, it can be interpreted as N. So it will represent what would happen in the end times. The Yam Suf, or the Sea of the N. En Yam, as well, at least you can hear, is very similar to Yom. Yom is day. And the Vav in the middle that makes it that pronunciation, Yom, can be taken away and remain with the same meaning. And that is also how Yam or sea is written. So Yam Suf can be seen as Yom Suf, so the day of the end. That having to do with the Sea of Reeds, like I mentioned, when it parted so that Israel could go through. So Kana is the place of reeds, so it will connect to that. And because the way it is written, it is connected to jealousy or the zeal, like the zeal of Yahweh. So here we have in the Hebrew Kana as reed. And then Kane, which is pretty much also reed or stock bone balances. Now let me keep going to the root. Here of Eve acquiring, because it is the root of also the name Cain, when she acquired Cain. So here, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, and conceived and bare Cain. So, like I was saying, the Kuf and the Nun, that would be the zeal. But I will have, oh, there you go. The zeal, jealousy, right? It is Kina, and it comes from Kana, same. All right, so as we know, all this is because in Exodus 34:14, let me show. Exodus 34:14, it says, "For thou shalt worship no other mighty one, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous mighty one." Whose name is jealous, the first manifestation, is a jealous mighty one. The second manifestation, first and last. And here we have jealous in the Hebrew 7067 as Kana. So you see how the same pronunciation. Now the place of reeds ends with a hey, but the zeal ends with a aleph, but they are both pronounced Kana. All right. And remember that when that happens, there's a relation between those words. So we can take it as both. And we have then here how it says, and on the third day, right? The third day. That's also important because remember that Yahushua was raised on the third day, right? Not only that, the Shabbat, the millennium that will start very soon, during the last 7 years, the last week of Daniel, that millennium, that Shabbat is the third day from when Mashiach came, right? And that is why we also read over here in the book of Hosea, chapter 6. It says, come and let us turn back to Yahweh, for he has torn, but he does heal us. He has stricken, but he binds us up. After 2 days, he shall revive us. That is the first resurrection. On the third day, he shall raise us up so that we live before him. On the third day, he shall raise us up so that we live before him. And that will be during the day of judgment at the end of the 1,000 years of shalom on the earth, and right before the new heavens and the new earth. So the judgment that comes so that we may enter those new heavens and that new earth. So on the third day, he shall raise us up so that we live before him. So now we have this that says, and on the third day, right? So it references resurrection, both Yahushua's resurrection that leads to our resurrection and those of the third day, because the chosen few will be transformed in that first resurrection, right? The transformation of the seventh trumpet. So, and on the third day, there was a wedding in Kana. So that leads to the second Exodus because of the Sea of Reeds, the place of reeds, right? But it also to the manifestation of the zeal of Yahweh for the wedding of the Lamb, right? Because there's a wedding in Kana on the third day. So when we enter the Shabbat, as we see in Revelation 19, the wedding of the Lamb will happen. The Lamb is the name in the flesh, and the name is Kana. The name is jealous, right? So the wedding in Zeal, in Kana of Galil, right? Galil, since it is a circle, is also connected to the earth because Yahweh, as Isaiah says, Yeshayahu, Yahweh is sitting on over the circle of the earth. So it is a circle connected also with Galil. So the wedding of the Lamb that needs to happen at the end of human history, the zeal of Yahweh on the third day. So, and on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galil, and the mother of Yahushua was there, right? In the flesh, that is Miriam, in the Ruach, or in the spiritual, yeah, that would be the Ruach HaKodesh. And both Yahushua and his taught ones were invited to the wedding, right? So everybody was invited, Yahushua and the disciples. And when they were short of wine, the mother of Yahushua said to him, they have no wine. I find this so interesting for many reasons. First, that would mean that Miriam already knew that Yahushua had authority and power to create or to make miracles. That is quite possible because of the fact that she just goes to him. Now, obviously, there's another possibility that they were very resourceful as a group, and Yahushua, being the leader of the disciples, um, was the one that Miriam went to talk to see if they could get some wine, and perhaps they were good getting wine, right? It is a possibility to see it in a more literal sense, but this shows how she had a feeling that he could make wine. Now, I find this interesting as well because in the previous study of the Torah in Spanish, we read about how Noah got drunk with wine right after the flood, right? And I was talking about how that also connects with the fact that Lot, after Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, he also got drunk with wine, right? And the coming of the Son of Man would be like the day and the days of Lot press during the seventh trumpet. So, and when they were short of wine, so remember, I already said, in the coming of the Son of Man would be like the days of Noah and the days of Lot. In both, after the destruction, they got drunk. That has to do with the fact that, for instance, there's a prophecy as well where Yahweh says that his sword will be drunk with the blood of the enemy, right? And that will happen in the war of Harmegiddo, which happens to uh, unfold right after the wedding of the Lamb. So we see here how there is the wedding of the Lamb, represented by the wedding in Kana, and now he's asked if he can make wine, right? Or if he can get wine. And the second manifestation, that of the last, as Isaiah 63 says, he will tread on the wine press. So that will be him making wine. That of Revelation 14, right? At the very end of Revelation 14, when the many are thrown in the winepress. And then in Revelation 19, that is when he comes on a white horse with the heavenly army, and he is wearing red because of the winepress. So here we see that being represented in the prophetical, right? Because the blood of the many represents wine, since they are the grapes during the harvest, while the few, the chosen few, are the wheat, those who do not have to go through death, the chosen few. So another very important point regarding this um chapter, this story, is the fact that um in Judaism there is a belief that they take from the scriptures. However, sadly, they have the opinion that many of the prophecies, or all of the prophecies, are conditional in a way. Obviously, there are certain stories or prophecies in which we see there are conditions, like in the time of Jonah. If they repented, then the punishment wouldn't happen, right? For instance, but when it comes to the prophecies about the Messiah or the end times, they they will all fulfill, because Yahushua said not one letter will pass, right? So everything must fulfill from what is written in the Tanakh, the old covenant. So when Yahushua came as the last Adam to make the new covenant, everything began to happen once again, Galil, right, as a circuit, going again, but now in the spiritual instead of the physical, or instead of the flesh, right? Now with the spirit, not the letter, even though the letter is the one that tells us what would happen spiritually. So I say all of that because they have the idea that, for instance, if everybody repents, then the Messiah comes in a merciful way, so he would turn water to wine. But if they do not repent, if they continue in sin, then the Messiah would appear and turn water to blood, like it happened in the time of Moshe and Aharon during the Exodus, right? So here we have a story, and spoiler alert, right? Yahushua is going to be able to make wine. So we have a story in which Yahushua turns water to wine to show that that was the manifestation of the Messiah bringing mercy. In Revelation 11, we see that the two witnesses have the authority to change water to blood, because the two witnesses are like Moshe and Aharon, right? Because now the second Exodus will happen. So it's interesting that this same chapter has to do about something that happened in Kana, the place of reeds, just like the Sea of Reeds that was crossed during the Exodus, right? So Mashiach here is turning water to wine in the literal sense, to show us that he came to fulfill that manifestation of the Messiah turning water to wine. But in the spiritual, it represents the time of the end when the last would appear and turn water to blood, as Revelation 11 says, and as we also see in Revelation 14 during the harvest of the grapes, right? So I hope that's understood. And when they were short of wine, which is also interesting because remember that wine represents joy, right? And that is why it says that if the Messiah came to bring mercy, he would turn water to wine. So they were short of wine, just like in the end times, sadly, um, there will be a shortage of joy because of the way things will be happening, right? So, and when they were short of wine, the mother, which would represent the Ruach of Yahushua, said to him, they have no wine. I like the answer. Yahushua said to her, woman, what is that to me and to you? Right? Like, so what? What does that have to do with me? Right? And not that disrespectful as I just said it, but it's interesting that he is like surprised that he was told this, like, and what? So Yahushua said to her, woman, what is that to me and to you? My hour has not yet come. Right? This is important because, like I said, this is the first miracle, and in a way, gives, and I repeat, in a way, uh, and well, let's say in the book of John, gives a beginning to his ministry, right? But he's pretty much here, like we can see in a couple ways, he's saying, my ministry has not started yet, so I shouldn't be making miracles just yet, right? But in a prophetical way, once again, he's saying that he's going to be killed and give his blood as the wine of Pesach, right? For the new covenant. When he raises the cup and says, this is the blood of the new covenant that is spilled for the many, right? So by Yahushua saying, my hour has not yet come, is like saying, I'm not supposed to turn water into wine or his blood yet, right? His death, remember that water, when we are immersed in water, represents dying. And we drink the cup of redemption of Pesach, representing the blood of Mashiach. And when he died, water and blood came out of his side. So by Yahushua saying, my hour has not yet come, that water that he's about to turn to wine in the literal represents how he would turn his death, water, into life, blood, right? Represented by this wine. So hopefully that's understood. Yahushua said to her, woman, what is that to me and to you? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he says to you. I find that funny as well, because she's like, yeah, whatever, Yahushua, I know you're going to do it. Right? Because it's like, woman, so what? It's not my time yet. Do whatever he says to you, right? He's going to do it. So you see how his mother said to the servants, do whatever he says to you. Those words are also perfect in the sense of the Ruach telling us, do whatever he says to you, right? Like when Yahweh gives testimony of Mashiach and says, listen to him, he is my son. So his mother said to the servants, do whatever he says to you. And there were 6 stone water jugs standing there, according to the mode of cleansing of the Yehudim, each holding 2 or 3 measures. 2 or 3 measures. So first, look how it says there were 6 stone water jugs. So 6, like the 6 days of creation and the 6 millenniums, because one day is like 1,000 years, right? So once again, we see the uh follow-up of the interpretation of the wine press of the wrath of Yahweh, where the wine is made when the two witnesses appear and turn water to blood, when the wedding of the Lamb will happen, and the war of Harmagedon right after the sixth millennium. So, and there were six stone water jugs standing there. Like I said, also water, um, in a sense, represents death. Uh, Yahushua is the living water, right? When he was talking about water of this world, he said, whoever drinks of that water will be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become a fountain in that person of living waters, right? That lead to eternity. So, and there were six stone water jugs standing there. Those represent the 6,000 years of human history. It also represents men because the Vav is the one that has the numerical value 6, and it was on the sixth day that the man was made, was formed. So, and there were six stone water jugs, so human history, standing there according to the mode of cleansing of the Yehudim. So this is interesting as well because it has to do with the rituals that the Yehudim had of cleansing, right? Pretty much commandments of men. Obviously, it is good to have hygiene, right, and to wash and everything. But the fact that those jugs were for that purpose, and those are the ones that Yahushua is using to make wine, which is going to be used to get all happy in the wedding, right? Some would see that as a sin. Some would see that as a bad use of those jugs because they were for the cleansing ritual, right? Um, I'm saying that just in the sense that if the Pharisees were to see that, most likely they would complain, seeing it from their point of view of the flesh. So when there were six stone water jugs standing there according to the mode of the cleansing of the Yehudim, each holding two or three measures, which is pretty much in a way like it is said regarding witnesses, two or three witnesses for every truth, right? So first, on each of the 6,000 years, Yahweh gave two or three witnesses, not only through humans, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob, right? Adam, Hanok, and Noach. Um, and well, we can say a bunch of others right through our history. Um, two or three witnesses as well, as in Eliyahu, Mashiach, and the prophet like Moshe at the end of the 6,000 years, like the six stone water jugs. So each holding two or three measures. And measure, remember that means judging. It represents judging, to measure. As we see in Revelation 11, when Yahushua, this same John who wrote this book, is given a rod to measure the temple. And that refers to judging the people who are the congregation. So Yahushua said to them, fill the water jugs with water. Fill the water jugs with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, now draw out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. So see how powerful that maybe he made a prayer in his mind. Maybe he went on the side and prayed a little, or maybe he just thought about it and it happened because of his complete faith, right? And and I'll use the word simple because that's how Yahweh made it. It is us who make it difficult by putting doubt in the mix. But he said that it's as simple as having faith, right? We can move a mountain. So Yahushua just said, put water on those jugs, and now just draw out some and take it to the master. He'll drink it and say something about it, right? So he already had all the faith that during that process, that water would turn to wine. So, and he said to them, now draw out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. But when the master of the feast had tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, which is also important, as in the sense of Yahushua was not like, right, saying, yo, that was water, right? Remember that? uh, he wasn't told anything. He's just like, drink this, see what you think. But when the master of the feast had tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. So it is interesting here because if we see this as a representation of the wedding of the Lamb, here Yahushua appears as the one who turns water to blood to give to the master, the sovereign, and then through that they call the bridegroom, right, to exalt him for preparing such great wine, for getting such great wine and giving it at the very end of the feast, which was not normal, for they always gave the best wine at the beginning of the feast. But Yahweh is preparing the best feast. He's preparing the best of the best for the very end. And it's also a representation of how Yahushua said that he would not drink the um, new wine until he would drink it with us in the kingdom of his father, right? So there's a representation here of that moment. So it says here, when the master of the feast had tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when they have drunk, then that which is poorer. You have kept the good wine until now. You have kept the good wine until now. So obviously, in the literal sense, this is showing that Yahushua Hamashiach not only made a miracle, but that wine was better than all of, like, better than any wine, right? So that is also the difference between a life without Mashiach and a life in Him. It is the same, and I say that right because the life is in the blood, and the blood is represented by wine. Wine represents joy, so the joy that we receive through Mashiach. Remember that Mashiach, if we reorder, like if we put the letters of the word Mashiach in a different order, we get Yismach, which means he will rejoice. So it is through the blood of Mashiach that we will rejoice. And the joy that we will have after this life will be greater than any joy that we may have had in this life. Unlike those who follow falsehood, wickedness, and all of that, who will have their best life during this time. So it says, you have kept the good wine until now, just like Yahweh is doing. This, the beginning of the signs. See, so that pretty much made became the beginning of the ministry of Mashiach, or at least of the signs that he started doing publicly. This, the beginning of the signs Yahushua did in Kana of Galilee and manifested his esteem, and his thought ones believed in him. So he was just starting with the disciples, and then he made this miracle, which is an interesting miracle, I repeat. In the, like, if we just see it in the historical or the literal sense, doesn't seem to have, like, I wouldn't doubt if people would say that he um shouldn't have done this because he was making wine for people to get drunk, right? I would not doubt at all people saying that or believing that. But that shows Yahweh's mercy. It shows that he likes people to rejoice. He gives permission to drink wine, as always, like, obviously, having control over whatever wine does to you, right? having that willpower through the ruach to control yourself when drinking and knowing when to stop. So Yahushua's first miracle was making wine for a party. That's amazing, right? Uh, and a lot of people would see that as negative when you think it in the literal. And even in the literal sense, shows us Yahweh's goodness. But in the spiritual, is showing the end times, as I already explained. So I won't repeat everything again, but it's showing the wine created through the wine press of the wrath during the Great Tribulation after the harvest of Revelation 14, when the grapes are thrown in the winepress and the last will tread that winepress. The wine will come out for the wedding of the Lamb, we could say, in this sense of connecting this dots. And then the war of Armageddon. So this is the beginning of the signs. Signs. So signs that he is Mashiach, that he has power, signs that he is Mashiach and came to bring mercy, the forgiveness of sins, because he turned water to wine, not to blood, but also signs of the coming end times. Yahushua did in Kana, zeal, in jealousy, or in the place of reeds of Galil, the circuit, and manifested his esteem, and his taught ones believed in him. After this, he went down to Nahum, he and his mother, and his brothers, and his taught ones. And there they stayed not many days. So we see that he had brothers, something that they try to hide in Catholicism. And they claim that that refers to cousins, but we have other verses where we see that they are biological brothers. So after this, he went down to Nahum, he and his mother. When we see Nahum, it is composed by, you see, Kapar Nahum. So the covering, atonement, Nahum, that brings rest. So they translate it as the village of comfort. But if we see this one right here, sorry, it says Kapar, which is, oh, they put it as village. That is one translation, but let me go here. There you go. To cover, to purge, to atone, right? May reconciliation cover over pitch, which is what was used also during the time of the Ark of Noah. Kafar was used to cover the ark, to represent the covering of our sins, right? The days of the Son of Man, like the days of Noah. And that's interesting because Nahum has the word Noah, as you can see here. Nahum, this right here is Noah. And Nahum is also a prophet, just in case. Comes from Naham, comfort, or console oneself, repent, regret, to be sorry, etc. Naham, that would be the verb. So Kafar Nahum, the covering of rest, or that brings comfort, or the covering through repentance, right? So we can see Kafar Nahum as the forgiveness that comes through repentance. Now going back, after this, he went down to Kafar Nahum, he and his mother and his brothers and his stud ones, and they stayed not many days. And the Pesach of the Yehudim was near, and Yahushua went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the set apart place those selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers sitting. Right? So it's about to get good. Right? So we just saw in the previous verses, he turned water to wine, right? And in the prophetical, that represents everything that I just said. uh, the wine press to make wine, Revelation 14. The wedding of the Lamb as the wedding in Kana, Revelation 19. And right on that same chapter, the war of Harmegiddo, when Mashiach with the chosen few as the heavenly army come to destroy the nations, take them out of this world, right? And give those leaders as food for the animals. So now we see that right after the wedding in Kana, like the wedding of the lamb, he goes to the temple, like coming to the earth, and takes everybody out, like taking the nations out. So, and he found in the set apart place those selling oxen and sheep and doves. It's interesting that it says in the set apart place. Now, well, it depends because you could say just temple and refer to the courtyard, right? But if they were inside, yeah, I doubt they would be in the set apart place. But maybe that has to do with the translation. In the 14, most likely here it says temple and found the temple. Yeah, in the temple. So that most likely happened in the courtyard, right? So, and having made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the set apart place, or drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the money changers' coins, and overturned the tables. Imagine what the Pharisees and everybody else thought about him right after this moment, and what when they saw that. And many would obviously claim that, meaning, like many may read this nowadays and accept it because they accept Yahushua as Mashiach. They know he's Mashiach, so they may say, "Yeah, that's good." But when you think about it, how people would have um, thought of this moment if they were in that time, um, I wouldn't doubt even that many came to try and put doubt in the minds of the disciples for seeing Mashiach act like that, and maybe saying that he couldn't control himself, or that he was disrespectful to the temple and to the leaders, that because the leaders would accept that, so why would he do that, etc. So it's interesting to think about this moment without taking into account everything that we already know about him and how we were born with all these stories already taught to us, knowing who he is, right? So it makes it a little bit different. And having made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the set apart place of the temple. I repeat. And you see, it's interesting what he uses, because it is like treating not only the animals, like it would be like saying that he's just taking out the animals, but the people who are selling them are acting like animals, so they are included. And having made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. You see, with the animals, as if they were similar. The sheep and the oxen that were sacrificed in the temple, of course, and that's why it's sold over there. And poured out the money changers' coins and overturned the tables. Overturned the tables. I find this interesting also because it is like what he came to do spiritually, right? They had a doctrine, they had an idea of the Torah, and he came to overturn that, turn it to the true way in which it should be. But to them, it was completely opposite. It was completely different than what they expected and wanted, because they were under Satan, not under Yahweh. So that's why they couldn't accept Mashiach, right? Because they were not children of Yahweh, as he tells us in, well, chapter 8 when we get there. So, and he said to those selling doves, "Take these away. Do not make the house of my father a house of merchandise." And he said to those selling doves, "Take these away. Do not make the house of my father." So there he's being clear that Yahweh is his father. He doesn't say, "Do not make the house of our father," right? He says, "my father." So he's clear about him being the only son, therefore Mashiach. "Do not make the house of my father a house of merchandise." And it's interesting that here Mashiach has a jealousy for his house, for the temple. In fact, I think it's about to be, yeah. "And he stood once remembered that it was written, The zeal for your house has eaten me up. Right? So Psalm 69:9, let me go there for a moment. For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproach thee are fallen upon me. For the zeal, you see, Kana, which is the word we were seeing. He came from the wedding at Kana, and now he is manifesting the Kina, the zeal for the house of Yahweh, as prophesied. Is that understood? So you see how even the second event is connected to the same prophetical idea of the end times. So, and he said to those selling doves, which represented the Ruach and were also used for sacrifices, take these away, right? Those false doctrines, those false spirits, the spirit that leads to the prosperity doctrine. Do not make the house of my father a house of merchandise, right? And his taught ones remembered that it was written, the zeal for your house has eaten me up. The kina. So this represents the coming, like I always say, what one fulfills in the literal sense, the other one fulfills in the spiritual sense. Yahushua did this in the literal to represent the coming of the last as the consuming fire. That's why zeal is connected also to fire, as you can see right here. You see the wrath of Yahweh, and Yahweh compares the zeal with fire, as we see in the book of Songs, chapter 8, verse 6. So the zeal for your house has eaten me up. So the taught ones, the disciples, remember that. And they were like, okay, so that's why this is happening. That's great. And you see, that is also interesting because this is what they were expecting. This is what they wanted, really. Yahushua to destroy everything in a more literal sense and get rid of the Roman Empire and manifest the kingdom of Yahweh in the literal sense. But Yahushua came to do it in the spiritual. This was the only moment where he acted this way to show a representation, to give us a representation through the book of Yahushua of what is coming in the end when he comes as the wrath, right? When the last comes as the wrath of Yahweh, or to manifest the wrath of Yahweh, just like here, the mercy was being manifested. Also, it's interesting how Yahushua is so jealous for the temple of stone. But then when he's about to die, he says, destroy the temple and I will raise it up in 3 days. Showing that after his death and resurrection, the temple made of stone would not be what it used to be, because it was just a representation. And after Mashiach died, the spirit of Yahweh would come out of the temple. And that is also shown in the Talmud by the Jews themselves. They write that, they don't write it like that, but during the last 40 years of the second temple, and what I say that they don't write is that it was right after they killed Mashiach, right after they killed Yahushua. There were 40 years before they destroyed the temple. In the Talmud, they said that during the last 40 years of the second temple, um, well, there's a verse where it says that they heard a voice of what they think are the angels who said that they were gonna get out of that temple, that it was a time to get out of there. Basically, the presence of Yahweh or his malachim coming out of the temple. But mainly during 40 years, the light of the menorah would go out every night or every day. Every night, the doors would open by themselves, and that represented a prophecy that says that they open for destruction to enter. Um, so they knew the destruction was coming, which happened in the year 70. Then when they would throw lots for Yom Kippur, um, the right hand will always fall for Azazel, which was a bad omen or bad sign. And it happened during 40 years. Every time it fell the same way. The probability of that is amazingly, like, almost, well, 0.0000000009, something like that. Take 1 2 zeros And I do write about that in my book, Declaring the End from the Beginning, this right here. So, um, so Yahushua, um, here shows the importance of the temple because of what it represents, and because he is entering the temple, as during the end times the wrath of Yahweh will manifest in on the earth. But then he shows that the temple was just a representation. And that's why he said, destroy the temple and I will raise it up in 3 days, because he was talking about his own body. After they killed Mashiach, like I said, for 40 years, the light of the menorah would go out, the doors would open by themselves. When they would throw lots every Yom Kippur, the right hand would fall to Azazel, and the cord, the the red or scarlet cord that would turn white when their sins would be forgiven, never turned white for 40 years straight once again. So that showed that they had killed Mashiach, and that's why the presence of Yahweh came out of the temple, and that's why the rituals that they would make for Yom Kippur for those last 40 years were not accepted by the Most High. So the zeal for your house has eaten me up. And the Yahudim answered and said to him, what sign do you show to us, since you are doing these? Right? So since you are making all this mess in the temple, as they would think, right? What sign do you show us? It's interesting. They were not in the wedding of Kana, so they didn't see that sign. That should have been enough. But he is not like saying publicly everything that he's doing. So here they are asking. The Yahudim answered and said to him, what sign do you show to us, since you are doing these? Yahushua answered and said to them, there you go, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I shall raise it. Right? So he says, what sign do you give us? And he pretty much is saying the sign of Yonah. Kill me, and I will resurrect in 3 days. But they are not understanding, because they were in the flesh. They did not have the spirit of truth. So they were thinking of the temple, because they were actually asking, why are you doing all of this? Give us a sign. So in code, he's saying, kill me and I will be resurrected. But since it's code and they didn't understand coding, he to them is saying, if you want, destroy this whole building and I will raise it up in 3 days. Right? So destroy this temple, and in 3 days I shall raise it. Then the Yahudim said, it took 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days, right? So, in a way, they destroyed the temple through their actions by killing Mashiach. Not only they destroyed the temple in that sense, because Yahushua's body is the temple, the true temple, but through that, the presence of Yahweh came out of the temple, so the temple lost all meaning and purpose. So it was all a matter of time for it to be destroyed. So Yahweh gave 40 years for repentance, which they did not take. And that's why in the year 70, it was destroyed as a representation of what will happen in the end times with the abomination of desolation. And that's why many people believe that the book of Revelation already manifested, or the end times, the apocalypse already happened in the time of the destruction of the second temple. Now here the Yehudim are so close to realize who Yahushua is, because he's even telling them, you can kill me and I will be resurrected. But not only that, remember that Daniel had prophesied that the Messiah would come after 62 weeks. And then, well, he says that there will be 69 weeks for Mashiach to appear and be killed. But those 69 would be separated in 62 and 7. And those 7, right? 7 weeks, that's 7 times 7, that's 49 years. That would be the time that would take the Yahudim to build the temple again and the wall. And that's what happens in the book of Nehemiah, right? When he is sent to build the wall and then the temple. but there are a lot of people that are against the building of the wall and the temple. So it takes, we could say, 3 years for the temple to be able to be built, right? So here they say it took 46 years to build this dwelling place, this temple. 46 years plus the 3 years that it took for Nehemiah to be able to build everything, and Zerubbabel, as he was prophesied in Zechariah, which is a representation of the witness like Moshe, as we see in the book of Zechariah, in the book of Haggai. So 46 to build a temple plus those three after the decree to build it, but due to the fact that there was um, people against it, they couldn't build it right away. Plus, they had to build the wall, and that's how it started. So the Yahudim said it took 46 years to build the temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days. So we see here that the Yahudim, were thinking of the temple of stone. Yahushua was talking about his own body, his own death. And by the answer that the Yahudim gave, they are pretty much saying if they would take in account the time that it took for the building to start, they would realize that they were in the time in which Mashiach had to manifest, according to Daniel, who said that after 7 weeks, meaning 49 years. They already accounted for 46 years here, right? It took 46. Now, isn't it interesting that it says, you're going to raise it in three? 46 plus 3, 49. 49 is 7 sevens, the time prophesied by Daniel and how it actually happened. So they had the answer in front of them that Mashiach was Yahushua and he was coming to fulfill the words of Daniel because the temple had been there for 46 years, plus the three that took for it to start. But he spoke about the temple of his body. So he was talking about his own body that they would kill. So when he was raised from the dead, his taught ones remembered that he said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Yahushua had said. So imagine it took for Mashiach to be killed and resurrected. And even we could say for them to get more of the Ruach, for them to understand and remember that Yahushua had said this. So that means that at this moment, they didn't understand anything. They thought just like the Yahudim. They thought that Yahushua was talking about destroying the temple of stone, which is one of the things that they used to um, condemn him to death. Then the Yahudim said it took 46 years to build this dwelling place, this temple, and you were going to raise it in 3 days. But he spoke about the dwelling place of his body. And imagine also that I would think it takes more power to be resurrected from the dead than to build a temple real quick, right? In fact, it is possible that if they get to build the third temple in Jerusalem, they might make it in a very fast way to make it seem like if it was miraculous in a way. It is quite possible. They have almost everything ready. So they might even build it somewhere else and then just transport it or something, right? Put it together on the Temple Mount if they get to do so. So it took 46 years to build this temple, and you were going to raise it in 3 days. So Yahushua is saying something else, and what he's saying needs even more power to be performed. Yet with this other thing, building a temple real quick, that is enough for them not to believe. But he spoke about the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his taught ones remembered that he said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Yahushua has said. And when he was in Jerusalem at the Pesach, at the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he was doing. This is interesting because he doesn't just say many believed in him when they saw the signs which he was doing. He says many believed in his name. So we see the importance of believing in his name to become children of Yahweh, as John 1 said. Also, um, obviously, that's the reason why we pronounce the true name of the Messiah, not as the world calls him or calls the other, which they think is him. Many believed in his name. Yahushua means Yahweh saves. So we could say that many believed that Yahweh came to save them. Many believed that Yahushua was the salvation sent by Yahweh, was and is the Messiah, Mashiach. Many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he was doing. But Yahushua was not entrusting himself to them because he knew all men. This is sad and also interesting and sad because, well, yeah, it manifests when you follow Mashiach, it will manifest also in a way in your life, one way or another sometimes. Um, but Yahushua was not entrusting himself to them. So even though they claimed to believe in him, he didn't trust them because he knew that some of them or most of them would end up not believing, even though they were claiming to believe in that time, right? He knew that their faith would be moved um, because of their doubt eventually through the influence of the Pharisees and all of that. So Yahushua was not entrusting himself to them because he knew all men and had no need that anyone should witness of men, for he knew what was in men. And it is written after the flood of Noah, and well, during the flood of Noah and all of that, Yahweh spoke about how men would lean towards evil because of the Yetzer Hara in the heart, right? The foolish heart, deceitful. So he had no need that anyone should witness of men, for he knew what was in men. Sadly, wickedness. And that wickedness would lead most men to reject Mashiach and even get to kill him and ask for his sacrifice. Even though here they were all believing, right? Many believed in his name. So the same will happen. Many will claim to believe in his name, but at the end, very few will remain or persevere in his name because it is written, you will be hated for my name's sake, but he who perseveres till the end, he shall be saved. So this is how we're going to end it tonight.